The weight of the day pressed against my shoulders before I even stepped onto the patio. My birthday. A word that tasted like ash on my tongue. Laughter bounced around the courtyard, light and careless, carried on the warm afternoon breeze. Simone gleamed under the string of twinkling lights, the center of every delighted glance her friends cast her direction. 3 of her girlfriends surrounded her like polished pearls, their smiles wide, their glasses raised in unison. They leaned in toward one another, sharing private jokes. My name, I felt, was part of their hushed whispers. A single slice of chocolate cake, my favorite, sat on a plate in my hand. She had baked it herself. The icing, soft and sweet, felt like bitter irony, sliding in my hand like a neon sign of my own hopeful stupidity. I offered it to her. For a moment, the world paused. The cake felt heavy, like a stone of all my past efforts crushing me. Her lips curled into a slow, knowing smirk. Her glass turned toward me, clinking with those of her friends. The sound felt like a hammer against my chest. "You're a nobody," Simone's voice cut through the air, clear as crystal, sharp enough to cut steel. I swallowed, tasting sugar and salt and despair. The word echoed in my mind, pounding against every dream I had. "You fix toilets. You think that makes you a man?" Her friends laughed, a bubbling cacophony that wrapped around me and squeezed. I thought I might sink into the table, vanish under the weight of their mockery. My gaze dropped to the cake, dark crumb flaking onto my work shirt, staining the image of a man who could provide, repair, build, mend, but not this, not humiliation. I didn't speak, I didn't fling the cake or slam the table. I just stood there until the next blow came, slow and measured. "Well, it's time you knew the truth," she continued, her voice a gentle snare. "You were always just temporary." Temporary. She stretched the word like a blade. The air shifted, heavy and cold, as if the sun had been swallowed by a moonless night. I felt something inside me catch fire and die, piece by piece. Then, beneath the laughter, a spark of something else flickered. Not anger, not yet. Cold clarity. I folded my hands around the plate and slipped it back onto the table, as if placing a sacred relic I never deserved. I felt the moisture in my palms, the tremor that threatened to give me away. But I held it together, each breath measured, each heartbeat a hammer. Simone's friends floated closer, drawn by the promise of drama. Their eyes glittered with anticipation. But I gave them nothing to feast on. I gave them my silence. Without a word, I turned away. Each step felt like I was walking through water, submerged in the humiliation I tried so hard to banish. I crossed the threshold into our home, the laughter barreling toward me like a tidal wave. Behind me, Simone's voice echoed, but it was as distant as a memory. In the bedroom, I found my duffel bag. I packed only what I needed: work boots scuffed by countless gutters and drains. The blue shirt she once said made me look gentle. My trusty wrench set, heavy and comforting in its old leather pouch. Each item represented a fragment of the man I had believed myself to be. My phone buzzed against the dresser, a staccato reminder of everything I was leaving behind. 29 missed calls, none from Simone. My heart stuttered at the thought, but I didn't look. I didn't have to. I knew what was there. She didn't want connection, she wanted an ending. I paused at the doorway, the bag slung over one shoulder, and I looked back at the life I had tried so hard to build. The framed photos of our wedding day, the bookshelf filled with shared dreams. I could almost hear my own laughter, a ghost of memory dancing between the walls. And then I realized it wasn't my laugh anymore. It was hers. The cool touch of the doorknob was the sound of freedom and pain. They came together, a symphony of loss and potential. I stepped outside and closed the door with a measured click. The world beyond was wide and uncharted, a road that bent and turned, offering both the promise of escape and the weight of unknown consequences. The air carried the scent of jasmine from the garden, sweet and biting like hope laced with regret. I should have felt relief, but I felt only the hollow ache where my heart had been. I hoisted the bag higher and walked to the truck. Each footfall on the gravel was deliberate. There was no trembling now, there was no begging. There was only the man I had been and the man I would become. I slid into the driver's seat and gently lifted the wrench pouch onto the passenger side. I placed my hands on the wheel, knuckles white. The engine roared to life. I reversed slowly, not looking back, not even once. I needed the road ahead, not the memories behind. I drove for 20 minutes before my phone buzzed again. A text message. None from Simone. A voicemail icon blinked next to my name. My daughter, Sierra, miss me. Azrenia, I closed my eyes. I imagined her small hands gripping mine, her giggle like sunlight. The thought warmed me, but it did not break the resolve building in my chest. I pulled onto the highway, the asphalt stretching before me like a river. I didn't have a destination. I only had the distance. And sometimes distance was the sharpest healing tool a man could wield. With one last look at the tail lights fading in the rear-view mirror, I let the highway swallow me. I pushed the accelerator further than I ever thought I would on a night I never planned to last. The city lights blurred past me in splashes of neon and faded to nothing as I crossed into the dark expanse beyond. My knuckles were white around the wheel, and the hum of the engine felt like a heartbeat echoing in my chest. Simone's laughter rang behind me like a warning. Gas stations appeared under flickering lights, their pumps alive with the desperation of travelers filling leaky tanks. I paid cash, its crumpled bills sliding across the counter like worthless tokens. The receipt showed sums I didn't want to think about as I stepped back into the night. After hours on two-lane highways lined with scrub and telephone poles, I turned onto a cracked gravel road that led to a small motel near Edison Creek. Spare rooms, vacancy, room 7. The neon sign buzzed in the damp air. I parked and grabbed my bag, each footstep crunching against the gravel. Inside, the desk clerk slid me a tarnished key without speaking. I carried it up narrow stairs that protested under my weight. The room was a relic of neglect. Wallpaper bubbled at the seams. The carpet bore stains that told stories I refused to imagine. A single lamp flickered beside a bed, whose springs groaned the moment I sat. In the corner, the bathroom door hung off its hinge, and mildew clung to every surface like an unwelcome reminder. It was fine. I didn't plan to stay long. I set my duffel on the edge of the bed and kicked off my boots, the cold hitting my bare feet like a slap. My wrench set lay waiting inside the pouch I had packed. Each tool was a promise I could still fix something in this world. I lay back and stared at the stained ceiling. The neon vacancy sign blinked in the darkness. Vacancy, vacancy. It pulsed like a cruel heartbeat. My mind drifted through the afternoon's humiliation. Nobody. Temporary. Her words echoed until the edges of my anger went numb. I opened my eyes and spotted a small window overlooking a gravel lot. Beyond it, broken lawn chairs and rusted barrels lay scattered. A distant street lamp cast a sickly glow on tree silhouettes. I wondered if anyone would come looking for me, or if I would remain here until the sun burned away the shadows. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. More missed calls, voicemails blinking at me. I slid it face down without checking. I didn't need apologies. I didn't intend to give. Silence stretched in the room, and I let it fill me. After hours on two-lane highways lined with scrub and telephone poles, I turned onto a cracked gravel road that led to a small motel near Edison Creek. Spare rooms, vacancy, room 7. The neon sign buzzed in the damp air, a lonely sentinel in the growing darkness. I parked and grabbed my bag, each footstep crunching against the loose gravel, the sound amplified in the profound quiet. Inside, the desk clerk, a man whose face seemed etched with the hours of the night, slid me a tarnished key without speaking, his eyes holding no judgment, no curiosity. I carried it up narrow stairs that protested under my weight, each groan a lament for forgotten travelers. The room was a relic of neglect, a testament to countless temporary stays. Wallpaper bubbled at the seams, peeling away like old skin, revealing the tired plaster beneath. The carpet bore stains that told silent stories I refused to imagine. dark blotches of spilled coffee and forgotten hopes. A single lamp flickered beside a bed whose springs groaned the moment I sat, a mournful sound that echoed the ache in my own bones. In the corner, the bathroom door hung off its hinge, a gaping maw, and mildew clung to every surface like an unwelcome reminder of decay. It was fine. I didn't plan to stay long. This was merely a pause, a breath before the next step. I set my duffel on the edge of the bed and kicked off my boots, the cold hitting my bare feet like a slap, a grounding sensation. My wrench set lay waiting inside the pouch I had packed, its familiar weight a strange comfort. Each tool, hard and unyielding, was a promise I could still fix something in this world, even if it wasn't my own shattered life. I lay back and stared at the stained ceiling, the patterns of dirt and water damage forming grotesque maps. The neon vacancy sign blinked in the darkness outside, its green light piercing the thin curtains. Vacancy, vacancy. It pulsed like a cruel heartbeat, echoing the words that had stripped me bare. Nobody. Temporary. Her voice, sharp and clear, replayed. In my mind, a relentless loop, until the edges of my anger went numb, replaced by a cold, hollow acceptance. I opened my eyes and spotted a small window overlooking a gravel lot. Beyond it, broken lawn chairs and rusted barrels lay scattered, silent witnesses to countless departures. A distant street lamp cast a sickly glow on tree silhouettes, turning them into skeletal fingers against the pale sky. I wondered if anyone would come looking for me, or if I would remain here until the sun burned away the shadows, leaving only the bleached bones of memory. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a frantic vibration, more missed calls, voicemails blinking at me, a digital chorus of concern or curiosity. I slid it face down without checking. I didn't need apologies. I didn't intend to give. Silence stretched in the room, vast and empty, and I let it fill me, a suffocating blanket that was also, strangely, a shield. I rose and walked to the sink, its basin chipped and stained, a testament to countless hurried washes. Water sputtered when I turned the tap, a hesitant cough, before running clear, then stopping altogether, a dry, mocking silence. I knelt, the cold tile pressing against my knees, and tightened the pipe below, feeling for the loose connection. The satisfying click as the leak sealed resonated in the quiet room. Flow restored. Leaks fixed. I straightened, a flicker of pride, small but real, igniting within me. A simple task, yet it felt like a declaration. Back on the bed, I sat upright, wrench in hand. The tools felt heavy with potential, no longer just instruments for mundane repairs. Pipes and pumps responded to force and precision. People did too, I realized, if you knew which valves to turn. Simone had turned mine until I fractured under the pressure, twisting them until I was nothing but a broken man. Now it was my turn. The thought was a cold, hard stone settling in my chest, not heavy with despair, but with a burgeoning resolve. I laid down again, wrapping my fingers around the thin sheet, the fabric rough against my skin. The clock on the nightstand glowed 3:14 a.m. In our home, she would be asleep beside Victor, dreaming of her perfect life, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing. I stared at the ceiling until I felt my eyelids grow heavy, not with exhaustion, but with the weight of the coming dawn. Morning light seeped through the curtains, weak and pale against the grime of the windowpane, revealing the dust motes dancing in the stale air. I shuffled downstairs, the lobby empty except for the clerk half awake behind the counter, his head propped on a hand. The coffee machine gurgled in the corner, a single mug in hand, its aroma harsh but welcome, a jolt of bitter reality. Back in the room, I sat at the rickety desk and opened a small notebook, its pages crisp and blank, a fresh start. My pen hovered before I began writing, each stroke deliberate, forming words that would become my new path. Gather evidence on Victor Alonso, verify restaurant ownership and liabilities, contact Petro for financial trails, prepare anonymous tips for inspectors, secure legal counsel, arrange a meeting with my lawyer about divorce, plan weekends with Sierra. Each line felt like armor, like a map out of the wreckage, a blueprint for a future I would build, piece by meticulous piece. I folded the paper, tucked it into my shirt pocket, and rested my hand on my wrench pouch, feeling the familiar contours of the tools beneath the leather. I stood by the window and watched the gravel lot slowly brighten, the sickly glow of the street lamp fading. The neon vacancy sign flickered off, its glow replaced by the soft hues of dawn, a new day dawning on a new purpose. Other guests might check out soon, but I had no intention of lingering. I picked up my duffel, slung it over my shoulder, and paused by the door, taking one last look at the battered room. It felt less like a cell and more like a workshop, a place where broken things went in and came out stronger. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and possibility. I turned the key, the engine roaring like promise, and exhaled years of doubt. The highway stretched onward, each mile a testament to resolve. Tomorrow, the world would know my name. I placed the notebook on the seat beside my wrench set and climbed into the truck. As I pulled away, the motel receded in the rearview mirror, a silent witness to my rebirth. I woke before sunrise, the pale light slanting through the dusty window of the room I now called home. My truck was parked below, its windows fogged with condensation, a loyal companion on this solitary journey. I slipped into my boots without lacing them all the way, wincing at the stiff leather, then hoisted my duffel bag over my shoulder and crept out the door. Petrov's garage sat a few blocks away, a squat red brick building with a sagging sign that read Petrov's Auto and Plumbing. Inside it was warm and smelled of diesel and motor oil, mingle with the clean metallic tang of new copper pipe. Old friend or not, Petrov didn't greet me with warmth. He merely nodded and motioned toward the narrow staircase at the back. No leases, no receipts, no questions. Just a handshake and a monthly envelope placed on his cluttered desk. Upstairs my room was smaller than the motel, but it was mine. The walls were cinder block gray, the floor concrete, and a single bulb hung from a frayed cord overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving light. I set my duffel on the chipped wooden chair by the window, tugged out my wrench set, and arranged the tools neatly on the battered desk. Ray Dalton. No social, no digital trace. I spelled my new identity across a sheet of notepaper. Name, phone number, 2 references I'd forged from local names I'd collected months ago. No connection to Mason Riley, no history. I folded the paper, slid it into the pocket of my faded work jacket, and tucked my driver's license deep in the bag. Morning light streamed through the skylight as the garage door rumbled upward. A big rig rolled in first, and Petrov barked orders to shift this drain, that hose, the oil pan. His mechanics moved with practiced precision, but none spoke to me. I was the new plumber, a service he could bill at higher rates, because few did both mechanical and plumbing repairs. My first assignment was under the hood of a delivery truck with coolant leaking from a cracked radiator. I knelt on the concrete floor, chasing a drip that formed a perfect, steady bead before splatting against the jack, and I felt the familiar weight of my wrench in my hand. And for the first time since I left Simone, something like peace settled behind my ribs. "Ray," Petrov called from the front office. "I've got a guy who needs a hand, clogged drain. Customer's mom called South Side." He tossed me a slip with the address scrawled in hurried pen. I stuffed it in my pocket and wiped grease from my arms on an old rag. As I climbed into my truck, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the reflection of a man who no longer recognized his own eyes. But those eyes burned with purpose. The address was a modest bungalow 2 neighborhoods over from the main drag near Edison Creek. An elderly woman greeted me at the door, clutching a handkerchief to her nose. Water pooled at her feet like a tidal wave. She invited me in with trembling thanks, and I knelt under the sink, my flashlight bobbing against the underside of the countertop. The U-bend was full of hair and grime, nothing I hadn't faced before. In 20 minutes, the water drained smoothly down the pipe, and the fountain ceased. I cleaned up, collected my fee, and on my way out, slipped a few coins and a handwritten note inside a kitchen drawer. The note read, If you ever need help or see anything odd, call this number. I didn't ask questions. I didn't sign it. The anonymity felt righteous. Back at the garage, I sorted through Petrov's stack of job requests. My fingers moved over the greasy paper, each slip a small problem to be solved, a temporary distraction. Then, one name caught my eye: Victor Alonso. The address was downtown, where the city's aspirations and secrets often met. Simone's so-called boyfriend, the restaurant owner she flaunted. I slid the card across the desk to Petrov, who glanced at it and shrugged. Gourmet bistro, high rollers eat there. That was all the confirmation I needed. The palace Simone had built with another man's applause. Over the next few days, I honed my routine. Morning oil changes and brake repairs. Afternoons unclogging toilets and repairing leaking faucets. I answered the calls as Ray with no hesitation. No lingering glance at my caller ID. I learned names and routines. Mr. Hawthorne preferred thick pipes under his sink. Mrs. Delgado's water heater hissed at precisely 4 a.m. I fixed their problems quietly, collected payment, and logged each job on my clipboard. But somewhere in my pocket lay Victor's address, a promise of truth awaiting exposition. Curiosity tugged at me as I climbed into the passenger seat of a friend's sedan one Tuesday afternoon. Petrov's cousin worked at the city records office, a favor owed for a free tune-up. I followed Petrov's cousin through the maze of filing cabinets, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust. For an hour I copied names, licenses, corporate registrations, and tax filings related to Victor Alonso's restaurants. 2 of them were strapped with liens for equipment loans. One claimed as profit what had actually vanished into shell corporations. My pen filled pages with numbers, dates, and notarized signatures that told the story Simone never bothered to discover. The cold, hard facts were far more satisfying than any emotional outburst. That night, I returned to the bungalow to retrieve the note. I expected nothing more than a phone number written on a scrap, but the drawer lay empty, and in its place was a small crumpled envelope addressed to me, Ray Dalton. Inside was a single line: "Keep going." No signature, no flourish, just the whisper of an ally. It was a jolt, a silent acknowledgement that I wasn't entirely alone in this quiet war. I lay awake on the thin mattress, listening to the hum of the street lamps through the window. I thought about Simone laughing behind the bistro's curtain, swirling wine in that crystal glass I once polished by hand. I thought about the debts hidden in corporate ledgers, the skeletons beneath the polished menus, and the lines I drew in the sand. This is where I start. Tomorrow, I would offer my services at the flagship bistro. I wouldn't give my real name. I wouldn't uncover my plan. I would simply bend the pipe and see what leaked through. In the dim glow of the room, I found my wrench and held it like a sword. Mason Riley was gone, but Ray Dalton would carve a new identity from the broken bones of betrayal. I closed my eyes, the single note burning in my pocket, and felt the first flicker of something long forgotten: conviction. When the sun rose, I would step into Victor's domain and begin drafting the blueprint of his downfall. One swing of the wrench, one secret uncovered at a time, and I would do it quietly, efficiently, with the precision of a man who knew exactly what he was fixing. The morning I walked toward Victor Alonso's flagship bistro, the sky was a slate-gray canvas, pregnant with rain that never fell. I felt the weight of purpose settle into my shoulders as I carried the toolbox Petrov had lent me: pipes, wrenches, sealant tape, and the notebook where I'd scribbled every lien and fictitious corporate registration I'd uncovered. The sign above the front door gleamed bronze letters on black enamel: Alonso's. It looked expensive, like a promise of fine dining and stifled laughter, but I knew the cracks lay just beneath that glossy finish. I paused at the curb, glancing in the window where a maitre d' fussed over napkins and menus. His starched collar and tie told me all I needed to know. Presentation mattered to these people. Image mattered more. Finally, I squared my shoulders, tucked my wrench under my arm, and stepped across the threshold. The hostess glanced up from her ledger, confusion flickering before she recovered. Mr. Alonso sent for me, I said, extending a business card that bore the name Ray Dalton and the tagline Dalton Plumbing and Maintenance. The faux serif font read like trust itself, and I watched her eyebrows rise, a tiny crack in her poise. She slid the card into a leather folder and pointed down a short hall, past gleaming tile floors and abstract art pieces. When I reached the kitchen door, a rush of steam and sizzling oil hit me like a wave. Victor stood by a service table, clipboard in hand, surveying a half-empty room. He dropped a nod when I entered. His apron was pristine, though his sharp eyes belied impatience. "I hear you do good work," he said, voice low, a mix of command and curiosity. "My drain's backing up and I need it fixed fast." I knelt beside the stainless steel drain rack, listening to the rumble of water like a distant storm. My gloves snapped snug around my fingers. I undid the grate and peered into the murky abyss, spotting the grease globules that congealed like shadows. I loosened the trap with my wrench and let the stagnant water slosh into a bucket. While I worked, I studied Victor's posture, tight jaw, restless gait. A man who lived by the letter of his ledger, not by genuine flavor or service. "Grease trap's oversized," I said, tightening the bolts. "It's efficient for volume, but you're flushing wastewater into the line too fast. You need a flow restrictor or a second trap downstream." He frowned, ticking the suggestion on his clipboard. "Costly." I met his gaze, the world narrowing to the two of us under that fluorescent light. "Worth it, otherwise you'll see more fines, maybe a shutdown order." I handed him a printed estimate, gloves smudged, corners curled. He examined it briefly, then tore off the top sheet and slid it back across the counter. "I'll do it," he said. "Tomorrow morning, before breakfast service." I nodded. 7 o'clock. As I packed my tools, I let the trap cover fall shut with a decisive clack. My mind traced the breadcrumbs I'd laid so carefully. The flagship bistro was built on lines of credit and phantom companies that existed only on paper, loans taken and collateral vanished. 2 of Alonso's restaurants teetered under liens for kitchen equipment. The third was a hollow shell masquerading as profit. I'd read the corporate filings in Petrov's cousin's office on Tuesday, the notarized ledgers exposing how the money flowed out of his enterprises into private accounts overseas. I returned the next morning at 7 sharp, wearing fresh coveralls and a tape measure clipped to my belt. The street was quiet, the world still slumbering except for the early crew, dragging crates of vegetables through the alley. I tapped on the side door, and a burly prep cook let me in, muttering about early inspections. I nodded and followed him into the prep area where I installed the secondary grease trap as recommended, retrofitting the drain line with new seals and clamps. My hands worked methodically, each twist of the wrench a reminder of how precision could dismantle a man's empire. When I finished, I cleaned the area with industrial solvent, no trace of spilled oil or fingerprints. Then I slipped 2 pinhole cameras into the kitchen ceiling vent and the breaker box in the back office, concealing them against the humming coils. I tested each with my phone's video feed, green lights blinking like conspirators. In the back office, I cracked open the fuse panel and replaced a single fuse with a look-alike wired to trip under slight overload. It would take weeks before it blew and triggered an investigation. I wiped my fingerprints off the metal with an alcohol swab and left like a shadow at midnight. Over the next few days, I checked the footage. The expired fish arrived in crates, stamped with yesterday's date. Dishes labeled fresh catch lingered in display coolers an hour past health code limits. Workers, some not old enough for driver's licenses, navigated prep stations with bare arms and dripping sinks. They cleaned plates without gloves, skimming cash tips into pockets faster than servers could claim them. And there, in the back office's mahogany chair, sat Simone, hands folded in her lap, swirling wine from a crystal glass I'd engraved with our anniversary date. Her laughter was low and triumphant, as if she reveled in a victory I'd never see. Each time I watched, I memorized faces, dates, places, every detail, another nail in the coffin of Victor's facade. I arranged anonymous tips, one to the health department with screenshots of mold creeping on the walk-in cooler, another to labor with photos of underage workers, a third to the IRS with copies of his Shell Corp filings. I sent each from encrypted emails, then watched as inspectors descended in waves. The flagship bistro closed for a week. Fines piled up like headstones. Through it all, I remained Ray. No link to Mason Riley. No sliver of empathy or hesitation. I was a repairman by trade, an avenger by design. And with every inspection report that landed in my inbox, I felt the foundations of Victor's empire quake. The cracks in the paint widened, revealing the rotting wood beneath. I stood one evening outside Alonso's, the neon sign dead after dark, mist swirling at my feet. I pulled the cameras from their hiding spots, metal cold in my palms. I wiped them clean and stored them in my duffel, souvenirs of a truth some had tried to bury. Simone might have thought she'd built a palace for herself, but palaces crumble when the mortar washes away. Tomorrow I'd move on to the next restaurant in her bragged-out lineup. I'd pose as the plumber again, bringing my wrench and my cameras, digging deeper into the whispers I'd collected from grateful cooks and panicked inspectors. Each job would be another stroke of quiet destruction, another whisper in the halls of justice. I drove away under the wash of street lights, the notebook with my notes brimming in my jacket pocket. In my rearview mirror, the sign flickered one final time before surrendering to darkness. I thought of Simone's smirk, and of that slice of cake I'd held like a sacrament before reality shattered. The cracks were everywhere now, in the paint, in her plans, in the illusion she'd created. I tightened my grip on the wheel and let the road swallow me once more. Mason Riley had lost his home, his wife, his identity, but in the wreckage he'd found a new purpose, and Ray Dalton was just getting started. Night crept over Alonso's flagship bistro like a velvet curtain, and I slipped through the service entrance just as the last dinner plates clattered in the kitchen. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on stainless steel surfaces. Everything here was clinical, sanitized, controlled, curated for an audience that paid for the promise of perfection. I carried my toolbox in one hand, my phone in the other, heart steady, pulse calm. The grease trap retrofit I'd installed days before was holding steady, but now it was time for proof, time for the cameras. I ducked beneath the pass-through window into the kitchen proper, my coveralls blending into the swarm of cooks and dishwashers. Steam rose and haloed around the heads of men in crisp white jackets, and the scent of sautéed garlic and rosemary filled the air. Pots clanged, orders shouted, knives chopped in a rhythm of culinary precision. I wove through the chaos, moving with purpose. No glance, no pause, just a plumber on a dinner-hour call, locating the vent and breaker box I'd scoped out earlier. The first camera went into the ceiling vent above the prep table. I pressed a tiny pinhole lens flush against the metal grill and secured it with tape the same color as the duct. A quick test on my phone,